Assalamu alaikum. So after 4.5 long, productive, amazing years in Turkey or Turkey, Istanbul, I was kicked out. I had to leave. The reason is because I went to renew my residency permit and they rejected me. Until then, it had been very easy. When I arrived in Turkey in 2021, it was the middle of Corona still. I remember there were so few flights from the UAE. We just were waiting for the flights to open up. And the first flight that opened up was through Kuwait. So we flew, we did a stopover in Kuwait, and then we flew to Istanbul. I believe we arrived in Sabiha airport, and I arranged a taxi to pick us up from the airport. And it took us to Başakşehir, Istanbul, where we then lived for the next 4.5 years. I remember arriving there, it was November, and it was raining and it was cloudy. That's so different, for me compared to the UAE where I was living before. UAE, every single day is blue skies, no clouds, mostly very hot. But I was actually experiencing a new season. I was actually experiencing autumn when I arrived in Istanbul. It was probably the 7th or 8th time I had been to Turkey, to Istanbul, but this time I was going with my life's possessions to actually move there. And we initially applied for our residency permit and they gave us a year. And then we renewed it the next year, and we renewed it the next year. And I believe it was after 4 years of doing that, so the initial residency permit and then 3 renewals of 1 year each. After that, they gave us only 6 months, and they started giving everybody 6 months residency permit. And after that first residency permit, there was a lot of uncertainty over, are they going to accept you? Are they going to reject you? A lot of people were getting rejected. A lot of rumors were going around in terms of how do you get accepted? What do you have to prove? What do you have to show them? What documents should you add? And I did what I could, wallah. Even the amount of money I was showing in my bank account, I asked people who are experienced in this, and they said, yeah, that's a good amount. You should be good with that. But we weren't good, obviously. And they rejected us. And they rejected us 1 week before the expiry of our residency permit. So if we had stayed just over 1 more week in the country, we would now be illegal. And that's what I did. My family left after 1 week. They left exactly on the expiry date of our permit. And I stayed for 3 more weeks just to pack things up, finish things up, sell things off, etc. So I ended up overstaying by about 2 weeks and I had to pay a fine for that. But I'm in good standing with Turkey, so inshallah when I visit, there will be no issues with getting in and anything like that. So for your benefit, what are the residency options in Turkey today? Because I know it well after living there and getting rejected and leaving and all of that. And my friends who are still there are trying to make sure that they're able to stay, because it is an amazing country. From the outside, some people might say it's secular, this and that. We can discuss that in another video. But the place we were living was amazing, alhamdulillah. And those 4.5 years, definitely some of the best years of my life. Alhamdulillah bil alameen. So if you want to live there now, there are less options than before. Like I said, in 2021, when I arrived, it was the most generous residency situation that I've heard of, right? Like in the Muslim world. All you needed was to rent an apartment, get like a year contract for a rental for an apartment, and provide all other general documentation about your passport copy and these kind of things, get the minimum health insurance type of thing, and you would get 1 year residency permit. You would even get 2 years residency permit. And this was called the tourist residency, meaning that you're living there as a tourist. You're there to visit the country, check it out. But a lot of people were using that, were applying for that, and they were getting approved for tourist residency for years and years. I believe in the first year of moving there, I met a guy who had been doing that for 8 years. He'd been a tourist in the country for 8 years. That's what I was on, the tourist residency, and most of my friends who were there on the tourist residency. However, since about April 2022, that is like a no-go now. If you come fresh to the country and you apply for that tourist residency, you will 95% not get it. The only exceptions I've seen to that is people who are applying for it and they're showing bank statements showing that they have $100,000, $200,000. Other than that, no one is getting that. That's why there was this flood of people, like even from the UK and the US, moving to Turkey But that all stopped in April 2022 when news got out that khalas, they are not giving those out anymore. So what are the options today? They're very basic. You could get a job there, which will give you a work permit. A work permit is one of the most powerful and strong residency permits, but of course it's linked to having a job. So that's like the Gulf. In the Khalij, that's how you can get a residency permit. That's how most people get it, is by having a job. And in Turkey, if you've got a job and a work permit for 5 years, you're eligible to apply for like either long-term residency, like 10 years, or even citizenship, okay? So it's like the strongest way of getting in there. Are there many jobs, you might be wondering, in Turkey for foreigners? Not really. The only people I know who have jobs there are people who are in the teaching field, right? I have a couple of friends who work for a university and they teach either English at the university or maybe other subjects because they're specialists in that field, okay? So that's the work permit. The second thing is a tourist residency, but not a normal one, one that's based on property. So you buy property, it has to be worth at least $200,000. Not that you paid $200,000 for it, but it has to be by an official surveyor. They have to come and they have to give it a value of at least $200,000. Now you might have paid $200,000 for it, you might have paid $250,000 or $300,000 for it, but on paper it has to be worth $200,000. When you do that, you are now eligible for the property tourist residency. And that would be like 1 year renewable. Maybe after the first year, you could do 2 years at a time, okay? And then the other option is to invest to get citizenship. So you would buy property or multiple properties worth at least $400,000, and then you would apply for citizenship based on your investment, and you would get citizenship. That process is become a bit long. They're delaying people's files and those applications, but you should still get it in about 6 to 12 months, I believe. I know people who got that, right? And before it used to be $250,000 that you had to invest, which is a bargain really to have that citizenship and the right to live in that country, which is now difficult to do. That's a bargain. And I know a lot of people who have that. So these are the ways really. You can't just go on one of those digital nomad kind of vibes. There's rumors about that, but that never came to reality. And I know a lot of people who came, even after April 2022, they wanted to live in Turkey. They were visiting it seriously. They came with their family and they were renting an Airbnb for 1-2 months. And in the end, they left because they just couldn't see a way of staying there. Even I should mention that even, for example, with the property one, there's always a fear, at least from my experience dealing with the immigration system in Turkey, there's always a fear that even if you've got everything correct, one little mistake could cause your residency application to be rejected. So, you know, you could have bought a property, spent all that money, and something happens where something is just not right and they just reject it. And you bought that property for nothing. It's a bit of a crazy system, not one of the worst in the world, but you know, not the most straightforward, not the most welcoming, to be honest, to foreigners, because it is a country, unlike the Gulf, they don't really need too many people to come in, or at least there are competing agendas, right? Some in the government or in the different political parties, some believe they need foreigners to come, they want foreigners to come, and some are against that. So there's a bit of a conflict within the government on that issue. So that's the situation today in Turkey. It's very hard, but for example, if you have visited there, you understand the benefits of living there, and you want to get citizenship, for example, you could go ahead and do that. Now, you may ask, if you were living there for 4.5 years, why is it after 4.5 years that they rejected you and they kicked you out? Well, this is my theory, okay? There were 2 reasons I thought that I might get rejected this time. One was that I'm not showing enough money. So that could either be the amount of money in my bank account or the amount that I'm spending on a monthly basis just wasn't high enough. Frankly, I mean, I was spending what I was spending. I'm not going to overspend just to show that I'm spending. And if you have to spend a certain amount just to live in a country, I mean, that's just crazy. But I put an amount of money that I was told should be enough, right? And I didn't want to put all my money in my Turkish bank account unless it was some sort of guarantee, unless I got an official statement from the immigration saying, you need specifically this amount of money showing in your bank account in this currency, and then you will get approved. But it was all hearsay. So I put a certain amount. I thought, let me take these steps and then trust in Allah on that. The other reason I thought I might get rejected is that there was a pattern that we were noticing that a lot of people who'd been living there about 4 to 5 years on a tourist residency, they were getting rejected. We noticed that. And so I thought, look, they just gave me 6 months renewal instead of a year. So the writing's a little bit on the wall. And that was a pattern that I noticed. You know, a friend of mine, just a couple months before I was rejected, he was rejected, and he had arrived around the same time as me. And so this was a pattern we were seeing, and there's nothing I could do about that. So first, how could I have stayed? Well, I could have gone on a work permit by opening my own company and then employing myself as an employee. The only way I could do that without hiring Turkish employees, which is a requirement for a foreigner who opens a business, you have to hire like 5 Turkish employees. I had an exception to that because I'd already been in Turkey for 3 years. So I could have got the work permit based on my own company. But again, I didn't want a situation where I need to pay just to live in a country, just to exist in a country. Because when you open a company, it costs money to open the company. Then every month you have to pay yourself a salary, like a fake salary, and pay the insurance for that and the income tax on that salary. And you have to pay an accountant to constantly like make sure your books are in order so that when you go to renew it, everything looks legit and you can do that. And frankly, I only knew one person who'd done this successfully, and he was still in his first year of doing this. So I didn't know if he was going to get renewed or not for sure. And I just didn't want to be in the situation where I have to pay like several $1,000s every year just to have that residency permit. I don't know. I just thought, what if I have a bad year? I don't make much money, and next thing, the country that I've invested so much in, I have to leave. So that was one thing. The other way I could have stayed is becoming a student. So this is another way that you can stay, and that's why I missed that out from the list of ways that you can come and live in Turkey, is get residency as a student. So you enroll in a university, whether it's a Turkish language course or a full-on degree, like a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, whatever. And these degrees are taught in English as well. And they will pretty much approve those kind of residency applications. The only thing is, obviously it's a limited time. And also you have to pay for that university, right? You have to pick a university that you don't have to attend physically. And then you would often have to like actually do the coursework and stuff. But that would give you a residency permit for the duration of your studies. So if you do a master's degree, maybe it's 2 years, maybe the first year you fail it, so you have to repeat the first year. So now you've stretched it out to 3 years. But then after that 3 years, what do? There's no light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the immigration system becoming more generous or more forgiving for foreigners to move and stay there. And so even that is just putting a plaster on the big gaping wound, right? So that's how I could have stayed if I really, really wanted to. But I already had it in my mind that I wanted to try and live in Algeria, in the country that I'm a citizen, in the country where I have family, in the country where I know the language and the culture. I thought, even though it didn't appeal to me too much in the past, you know, it's not as developed as Turkey or UAE or these countries that I've lived in, but I thought the benefit of it though might be that the people are quite close to Allah and I can integrate more because I'm one of them. I mean, so that's, and there's more stability because I'm a citizen. So that's the trade-off that inshallah will work out, that yes, we lose how convenient the country is, how developed the country is. We lose out a bit on that, but what we get in return is more stability, be more able to integrate. You know, my kids can literally talk to everybody in the country and make friends with people in the country, everyday people, and we can live more of a normal life. We're never going to be 100% like the people that are here in Algeria because that's not how we grew up. We weren't born and raised here. And my kids will not be like them even though they're born and raised here, or even if they're born and raised here, because we're just a bit different in that way. But we're still going to share a good 50, 60, 70, whatever % of the culture. And we'll take the benefits of having different citizenships and being more able to travel than the average Algerian. We'll take advantage of those things as well, and the fact that we speak other languages and stuff. So that's why I was kicked out of Turkey. That's why I chose not to fight it and try and find a way to stay there anyway. And that's why I've chosen to move to Algeria. Inshallah, there'll be a lot more videos coming, all about living internationally, doing Hijrah, my different experiences and the experiences I know of other people in all kinds of countries. So stay locked in for that and let me know what you think of this in the comments. Assalamu alaikum.